Hello and welcome. You're tuned in to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio. We are your home for the best in paranormal talk radio every week. Tune in and check out the show. Today we've got an interesting guest we're going to get to in a few moments. Tim, yesterday, supernatural news. As soon as we finished recording that episode, and we're ready to record this episode, a big news story flashed out, and I wanted to make sure that we cover it. Literally, to us, breaking news just came out moments ago. To those of you listening Thursday, this came out on Monday. Amityville horror killer Ronald DeFeo is dead in prison at the age of 69. Amityville horror killer Ronald DeFeo, who slaughtered his 6 family members back in 1974 on Long Island after allegedly hearing voices in his head, has died behind bars, according to officials. DeFeo died Friday while serving a 25-year-to-life sentence at Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York, officials told Newsday. He was 69. DeFeo was transferred to Albany Medical Center and pronounced dead at 6:35 p.m. An autopsy on the Albany County Medical Examiner's Office will rule out an official cause of death. DeFeo, whose nickname was Butch, was convicted of killing his mother, father, 2 sisters, and 2 brothers inside their home in Amityville on Ocean Avenue on November 13th of 1974. The then 23-year-old used a .35 caliber Marlin lever action rifle to slaughter his family members, who were all in bed at the same time. Dad, Ronald DeFeo Sr., 43, Mom, Louise DeFeo, 43, Dawn, 18, Allison, 13, Mark, 12, and John, 9. Both parents were shot twice, while the siblings were each shot once. At the trial, his lawyer mounted an insanity defense, claiming DeFeo heard voices, saying his family was plotting against him. He was convicted in 1975 and sentenced to 6 sentences of 25 years to life. Online State Department of Corrections records confirmed that DeFeo died on Friday. He had a parole hearing scheduled for July. In a jailhouse interview in 2006, DeFeo claimed he had only killed his father, his mother, and his eldest sister, Dawn. The other siblings were murdered by Dawn before DeFeo killed her, he claimed. The mass killing was the inspiration for the 1977 book, The Amityville Horror, and 2 years later, the cult classic Amityville Horror movie. In 2016, the notorious 5-bedroom, 3.5-bedroom colonial home where the bloodbath took place hit the market for $850,000 and went into contract months later. You know, I had an interesting experience a few years back. Was filming and doing something, and Chris Quartino, Christopher Lutz, the youngest boy of the Lutz family, and I have become very close friends over the years. And he said, "Dave, I want to do something, and I'd like you to come with me." I said, "Sure." He goes, "Let's go. Today is visiting day at prison, and today is the day Ronald DeFeo will take visitors." And we got up in our car and drove, I think it was 2.5 hours to the prison. It was very surreal. And I was going to sit with both Amityville kids. It was crazy. And we got to the prison, got checked in, and then they said that the week prior, DeFeo had switched his days. So actually we were there a day early. Oh. And they wouldn't ask him if he was willing to meet with us, and we had to be on a plane that night, so we couldn't meet with him. We had hoped to make the connection. As a matter of fact, I'd even been in talks recently to try to produce a program called Amityville: The Confrontation, having Butch DeFeo sit down with Christopher Lutz to talk about the Amityville Horror and talk about the DeFeo case and try to separate fact from fiction. Unfortunately, this leaves that out, but I really give a lot of credit to Chris that he was willing to go face that demon and face that part of his life again, because we know that this entire story has been really hard on the kids of the Lutz family.
Yeah, most definitely.
George and Kathy have since passed away, but the 3 children that were subjected to the story and the encounter were left scarred in many different ways because of that, being brutalized and verbally and physically assaulted because they were the Amityville kids. It's not been easy for them, but they're all off living good lives, and we just wish them all well. But Butch DeFeo, the murderer from Amityville, is now dead. All right. With that said, and wrapped up, again, just kind of covering the news story that we weren't able to get to on yesterday's program, let's get to our guest today, Mike Anthony, joins us this afternoon on the program to talk about his new book and his experience. The book is called Love, Dad, How My Father Died, Then Told Me He Didn't. The book is out and available now. We have a link up for that book, as a matter of fact, on today's program guide, so you can find more information about that. We'll also put up a link to Mike Anthony's website. Mike Anthony has been a professional actor and not professional bartender since he graduated from Wayne State University with a Master of Arts degree in theater. His first book, Life at Hamilton, chronicles the extraordinary time he spent as a theater bartender with an up-close perspective of Hamilton, an American musical, as it rocketed into Broadway history. Beyond his life in theater, Mike's journey took an unexpected turn when his dad passed, leading him down a remarkable path of discovery. He now spends a good portion of his time exploring evidence suggestive of the survival of consciousness beyond the demise of the physical body. A part of Mike's story is told in the documentary series Surviving Death that can be seen on Netflix. He is here with us today to talk about his book. Thank you so much for being with us today, Mike.
It's a pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
Fascinating story. Obviously, we're interested in all aspects of the supernatural. The concept of surviving death is something that everybody's interested in. And we want to know, is there something? And then what do we accept as proof of that something? So let's start with your story. Talk to me, if you would, about your dad prior to his death. What was your father like?
Yeah, my dad was an incredible guy. We were very close. He was just the most loving person that I'd ever met. He was not your average human being. When I was a little kid, he so stuck out from other adults in my life that at one point when we learned about angels, when I was like in catechism, it struck me that my dad had all of those qualities. And one morning in the kitchen, I was like, Dad, just tell me, your secret will be safe with me. Are you an angel? And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, well, you're just so nice to everybody. And he said, well, you should always try to be nice, which I knew was exactly what an angel in disguise would tell you. So he was just a remarkably good man.
And did you ever talk with him about the concept of life and death? Had you ever had any paranormal experiences growing up, or any that he might have related to you?
He and I did not talk about it a lot. It was something that I was interested in as a kid. I had a science teacher in high school actually named Mr. Sawyer, and once a week he allowed time to talk about the quote unquote paranormal, and it quickly became the favorite class of the week for everybody in school. And then we ended up having an after school club called the Phenomenology Club. So we looked at everything from Bigfoot to the Loch Ness Monster, UFOs, all of this stuff. So it was a passing interest of mine, but not something that my dad and I had talked about. And we were not a religious family. So my dad and I never really discussed the possibility of life after death.
So that just never really kind of resonated. I mean, what were your concepts, obviously having been open to it in school, what were your concepts of the paranormal prior to the passing of your father?
Well, I'd always loved science, right? From the time that I was very young. I tell the story in the book about watching planes take off. My dad would take my sister and I to an airport that was nearby, and we'd watch these planes take off. And I was fascinated at how these huge things could stay in the sky. And when I learned about why that is, once I got to middle school and then high school, something called Bernoulli's principle. And again, this teacher, Mr. Sawyer, taught us about that. It was like I was getting the mysteries of the universe were being unlocked for me. And the process to do that was science. So I fell in love with science, but at the same time, thanks in large part to Mr. Sawyer, but also just my own innate sense, I've always felt that there are places that science cannot reach. I think there are areas that our scientific instruments are not sensitive enough to register. So that has also been a part of my personal inner experience of what it is to be a human being, that there are things probably that are beyond our senses.
Well, working on Broadway and working in a theater with such rich history, I'm just curious, as an aside, were there ghost stories associated with any of the theaters you've ever worked with? And did you ever have an experience there?
Tons of stories, tons. I'd never had a personal experience, but a friend of mine who works at the Richard Rodgers, which is where Hamilton is, his name's Joseph, and he's the guy who closes up the theater at night. And one night, this is about probably 2 years ago, he's the last person in the theater, right? So he's totally alone in this 1,300 seat cavernous theater on Broadway. And he had just turned off the stage lights, and he was coming down the stairs into the orchestra level, where all of the seating is. And he heard this blood curdling scream coming from, he felt like it was maybe 10 feet away, and he shined his flashlight. And of course, there's nothing there. There's nobody. He's totally alone in the theater. And, and he ran for his life out of the theater. But there are tons of stories. That's probably the most visceral, but there are tons of stories of people seeing apparitions and things in the theaters. Yeah.
A lot of people will ask me, like, Dave, why do you think theaters are so haunted? Not movie theaters per se, but theaters where you see plays. And I've been like, listen, I love musicals and plays. And truly, if it was something that you enjoy doing, why wouldn't you go there? And you think about it's kind of feeding the supernatural. A play, a concert, comedy specials, music, all that takes place in those places are releasing energies, emotions, bringing you from the full range of crying to your favorite song, to laughing out loud, to funny bits, to enraged by scenes in plays, and just so much that just kind of feeds that environment. It seems like it would be the perfect battery for the supernatural.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if psychic energy is a real thing, right? If there is a part of us that can reach beyond the confines of our skull, and so I'll preface that by saying mainstream science, of course, says that is not possible, right? The majority of the well-known scientists in this country, anyway, will tell you that there is no such thing as anything paranormal, and that there's no influence of your brain beyond the skull. If they are wrong about that, which I now personally know that they are, then it makes total sense to me that a theater would be a place, as you said, like a battery. I mean, there's so much energy and emotion expended in a theater, and just pure drama, right? Actors are tend to be dramatic people on top of the actual drama of the plays themselves. So to me, it makes complete sense that would be a place that a lot of psychic energy would build up.
Exactly. Right. And that would feed it. And then again, if you're a spirit, a soul that loved that type of entertainment, why wouldn't you go back? Why wouldn't you go visit these? Listen, it's the cheapest ticket on Broadway.
Right, exactly.
Hamilton, you got to wait a year to get in on that. Now you can just go walk in and phase through walls. It's got to be an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, that's the best way to see Hamilton right now, is out of body. Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, that or on Netflix, isn't it? Or no, it's on Disney Plus.
On Disney Plus, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is phenomenal, by the way, folks. My daughters were like, Dad, we got to watch this musical. And although I love musicals and love history, just the idea of marrying a musical and history just kind of weirded me out. I sat down and watched that. What an amazing show. Just from start to finish. It is truly beautifully created and crafted. And it shows and transcends the fact that stories can be told no matter what color, belief, or understanding you have going into it. And I love the fact that there's such a diverse cast playing what are essentially all white Americans
right.
At the time. And it goes beyond that. You don't care because the story is so well done and the music is astounding in that play. That had to be pretty remarkable to be there and get to hear that every night.
Unreal. The guy, Lin-Manuel Miranda, the guy who wrote it, is an actual genius. We throw that word around a lot, but his brain works in a way that just the average brain doesn't. He's so fast. He's so smart. What he can do on the fly, Hamilton is something that he perfected over years, right? But just on the fly, he can improvise a rap for you that will be funny, creative, engaging, and it all rhymes. And he does it on the fly. He's truly extraordinary.
That's awesome. Very cool. Well, yeah, it's a great show. And boy, again, you could see that kind of energy and entertainment value to it as well. And why spirits would enjoy being there with that kind of emotion and elation being a part of this. Let's dive back into the story now. I'm sorry. Curiosity, when we get a chance to talk to somebody who does and has links to really fascinating places, I'm always curious how that affects them and their, have they had experiences there as well.
Sure.
But Your book, Love, Dad. I love the title, How My Father Died, Then Told Me He Didn't. Let's talk about this. Your father passed away unexpectedly, leaving your entire family kind of shocked and devastated. When did this happen?
2011, so 10 years ago.
And what happened? Can you get into that for us?
Sure. Yeah, it was, like you said, it was a complete shock. My dad was 60, but he was very young 60. We thought he had many, many decades left. He worked as a delivery driver for FedEx, which is a very active job. We thought that if anybody had a chance to reach 100 years old in our family, it would be him. So when I got the phone call, I was at the theater working. Intermission was just about to happen when I got the phone call that he was gone. And it was a shattering moment in my life. I'd never experienced anything like this. I had lost my grandparents when I was younger. And of course I was sad, but this was a different experience. I mean, it completely upended my life.
I can imagine, having lost my mom 5 years ago. I know how that that was a slow descent into cancer. So,
I'm sorry.
Tragic bam. That is something I hope I don't have to deal with again anytime soon. But that is certainly something that leaves you unsettled and disconnected feeling. What, having this moment play out for you and opening up, how was that for you to sit there and put these words on paper and kind of open that emotional scar again?
Well, because of the things that have happened, since my dad's death, I now have no doubt whatsoever that he is still with me. And I know that's a big statement, and I don't say it lightly. And that's what the book is. It's the journey that I took to get to where I am now. So opening up those scars, as you call them, it's always hard to go back to that moment, to hear that phone call again, hear my sister wailing and my mom screaming. I mean, I don't like thinking about that. So that part's hard. But I know that there's light at the end of that tunnel now. and not only light, I mean, I actually am happier in my life now than before my dad passed, because my dad went to such amazing lengths to let me know that he did not die. I mean that literally. And again, as crazy as that sounds. But the place that I was in was really dark right after he passed. I mean, when he died, I went into a full-blown existential crisis, because before I became an actor, I'd actually gone to college to be a teacher, a science teacher. So I had studied science, not only in high school, but also in college. And when he died, all of that science, all of those science classes that I had taken, the biology classes especially, hit me like a ton of bricks. And again, biology tells us, mainstream biology, that when the brain stops receiving oxygen, that is the end of the story, period. The guy that you thought of as your dad, all of those atoms that made up your dad, they are now, that's gone forever. And I was crushed by that thought, totally crushed at the time.
Yeah, it's an earth-shattering moment when you lose somebody that close to you. That and it's hard. People ask me all the time, well, how do you deal with it? Does it get easier? It never gets easier, because you have this loss of somebody that you loved so much. And like you said, you've got this concept that when the brain shuts down and the oxygen stops going through, science says, that's it. So mote it be, the end of existence. But is there something? And that's what fascinates me. People get on me all the time, Mike, because I've been involved in the paranormal my whole life, more heavily, of course, in the last 15 years since we started Darkness Radio. And my fear of death has been a driving motivator for that. And people are like, after all you've seen and experienced, and my answer has been, but I don't always know that what I'm experiencing is truly a proof of death or life existing beyond the end of the physical form, or is it time slip phenomena? Is it something else that exists, that's running parallel to our lives? So that's been a part of it that I can't definitively put my finger on it. And I, unlike you, have not had any profound, in the sense of communication the way you have with your father. I haven't had that connection with my mom, which was surprising to me. I've had things happen that I would say are signs, but again, is that the want and desire of the heart saying that I was getting signs, or is it truly something spectral, something that happened after your father died? how soon did a presence or a sense of his continued existence begin for you?
It actually began right away. The very, very first thing that happened was my dad always communicated with us through music while he was alive. Like one day he wasn't a big talker. My dad was a blue collar guy, and he did not express all of that enormous love that I was talking about through his words. It was all through his action and who he was as a human being. Like, he just emanated love. He didn't need to talk about it a lot. But one day he put us in the car when we were maybe 10 years old, my sister and I, and he put on a Carole King song called Child of Mine. And he said, I want you to listen to these words. This is how I feel about you. So music has always been a way that he'd communicated with us in his life. And if he found a new song that he knew that we would love, he would tell us about it. So after he died, maybe the day after, we were in his house, my sister and I, going through his stuff. And my dad kept all of these handwritten notes. He was not an organized guy whatsoever. And we found in this pile of papers this little scrap of paper that he'd ripped off that said, "Believe, tell Jen." Jen is my sister's name. And we didn't know what that meant. And then further down in the pile, we found a second note that said, "Believe, a country song." And it suddenly hit us that this must be a song my dad had heard twice on two different occasions that he meant to tell my sister about. But he forgot. And that completely broke our hearts to know that we were never going to know why he wanted to tell her about this song. Anyway, the following day, we were in my mom's house getting ready for the wake, and my mom decided she wanted to have some music playing for the wake. So we were putting together a playlist on iTunes, and I said, go type in "Believe" in country music and try to find what that song is. Turns out it's a song by Brooks and Dunn, and it is about a guy who lost his child and his wife, but got through his life knowing that he was going to see them again because he so believed in life after death. And it ends with the line, "You can't tell me that it all ends in a slow ride in a hearse." So we were shocked. And by the way, it had been popular like a decade before. So This was not a song that any of us had ever heard. You know what I mean? This was the first time we'd ever heard it. And how many songs are about death, or especially the belief in life after death? Not a whole lot of popular songs. So that was, and if that had been the whole thing, that would have been a nice little wink from my dad, it felt like. But a few days after his funeral, I was driving back to New York. For the first time, I was alone. And you know how when you're planning for the funeral, there's so much activity going on, and you're kind of you can be in a state of shock almost. And it's, you might not be really dealing with the loss because there's so much activity. And that's what was happening with me. I discovered as I was driving back to New York, and for the first time I'm alone, and the idea of him no longer being physically on the planet really hit me. And I started like sobbing in the car, and I'm getting ready to pull over because I can't see the road. Now, at that time, I always listened to my own music in the car. As soon as iPods came out, and then my iPhone, I always just plug my phone in and listen to my own music. On that day, I simply didn't have the energy to plug my phone in. So as it turns out, the radio happened to be on in the background, and I didn't turn it on. It was just on because I did not connect the phone. And I suddenly hear these words, and my heart starts to pound, and I go to turn up the volume, and I'm actually afraid to turn it up because if I'm hearing what I think I'm hearing, I'm like going to lose control of this car. That's how it felt in the moment. And I turn it up, and sure enough, I hear the words blast through the radio. "You can't tell me it all ends in a slow ride in a hearse." It was that song playing on my radio, which I had never heard in my life until that morning before the wake. So that was sort of the first thing that felt like a communication from my dad.
I love that it's music, because music, of course, is an integral part of my life and has been for many years. It saved my life from suicide attempt in high school with Bruce Springsteen, which we talked about on our show. But it's interesting when the music hits you, how it's like a revelation. It's not just it's not happenstance, for newer listeners. When I was in a very dark place in high school and had decided this was it, I was going to end my life, tried to kill myself. The gun refused to fire. The bullet wouldn't go. I put the gun away because I saw my father's headlights pan into the bedroom, and I didn't want him to hear the crack of the gun and know he was that close.
Oh, wow.
And I went downstairs, and every channel I turned on was Dancing in the Dark by Bruce Springsteen, which I'd never paid much attention to other than it was a fun little pop tune until I started listening. And here I am in this wallowing in this self-pity of alone, feeling like isolated. Nobody's ever felt these feelings before. And I start hearing the words of this man. And it felt like around the third time I listened to the song, like somebody removed their hands from my ears and the words resonated. And I was like, this is more than happenstance. This is a message. And it walked me through realizing I'm not alone. A similar situation many years later when I was having a despondent moment as an adult, driving in the car, I remember just praying out loud, and there's a song playing in the background. And I've heard it a million times. I've always enjoyed it. I never even put any thought into it. But as I'm driving, I feel like I'm numb. I'm dealing with this. I'm lost. And I just said, God, I'm going to need a sign. I'm going to need something to let me know you're actually there and care. And I couldn't finish the words quick enough, Mike. And it felt like somebody, again, pulled their hands off my ears quickly, and the muffled background sound poured in. There's Cyndi Lauper's song that, again, taken as on the whole, is a fun little pop, interesting song. But when the hands removed from my ears, metaphysically, the line that keeps repeating is, if you look, if you're lost and you look, then you will find me, time after time. And it just kept repeating that. And I'm like, holy shit, you know?
Yeah.
And I felt like I was being spoken to through music. Is it a moment of coincidence, happenstance, or synchronicity? I believe that music has that power, and I believe that the spirits, if you're going to manipulate something, that's going to be something that resonates with the soul more than anything. So it's so impactful to me that this powerful connection was made to you through music. And here's the interesting thing. Your dad died suddenly.
Yeah.
This wasn't like he was slowly dying of a disease and jotted down some of these songs. It's interesting. It was almost like he was telegraphed. He was giving you a message before he even left the physical form.
Yeah. First of all, your story gave me chills. That's whatever it is, it gave me chills. When I look back on all of it now, it seems to me like there is some sort of an orchestration to this whole thing, this whole human thing. And my dad was like, even before he knew he was going anywhere, because again, as far as he knew, he was completely healthy. He was laying these breadcrumbs even before he passed, and so that does make me feel like there is something somewhere pulling some strings.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. And that he had the wherewithal to know that, to be, as you said, it's not like you talked about the afterlife with your father.
Yeah. What's crazy too, that night, my dad and I spent our last day together. My whole thing, we had this amazing, perfect day together, which I describe in the book. It was really uncanny the way that it all happened. And the night ended with just my dad and I in the living room watching Monday Night Football together. And we were having a discussion about his mom. And his mom at that time was in the throes of Alzheimer's disease. And she is a person who'd always been, I think, afraid of dying. Like most of us, the idea of dying is a scary thing. And we were talking about how Alzheimer's, as difficult as it is for the family members, to have your mom not know who you are anymore, for instance. I mean, that's incredibly painful. But for her, I was saying to my dad, it's kind of a blessing. She's not afraid now about the end of her life. She's kind of it eases a little bit of
disconnected,
that.
Right?
Yes, yeah. And my dad said to me, so we're talking about his mom, and he says to me, "Oh, I'm not afraid to die." Now, he said those words, again, it doesn't make sense because we were not talking about him. But then 30 minutes after saying those words to me, telling his son he was not afraid to die, my dad died. Because when he left me that night, he drove around the corner. My parents had been divorced since I was very young, but they stayed close. So my dad's house was only about 5 minutes away from my mom's. He left me at my mom's house that night, went into his house, up the steps, and died. Like, he still had his keys in his hands. Not less than a few minutes after telling me he wasn't afraid of dying, he died. So again, it feels like an orchestration to all of this.
Do you feel, Mike, that he knew something was coming?
I wonder about it. Yeah, I wonder about that now. I mean, it seems to me that he at least subconsciously knew. that something was up. I mean, he was the kind of guy that if there had been anything wrong with him, not in a million years would he, quote unquote, burden us with his issues. You know what I mean? Of course, we would have dropped every single thing in our lives to do whatever we had to do to make sure my dad was okay. But he would never have wanted, he would have thought that he was being a burden on people. So he would never have told us if there was something going on. So it's hard to say, but it does seem now when I think about, especially again, our last day together where we were all together as a family in this really special way. It does seem like some part of him, maybe even a not conscious part of him, knew that something was about to shift.
Yeah, I wonder how many people do start to telegraph that or know it. You know, my wife's father passed away this last, I want to say it was July. And he called her out of the blue. They had this wonderful conversation. They hung up the phone and he walked outside and was dead 10 minutes later. And same thing, massive heart attack, was just gone. But she got that closure. She got the chance to talk to her father and ended the call with, I love you too. We'll talk soon. And that was it. Yeah. So there is it makes you wonder if people are aware, even if they're not showing signs that death is near, if they're aware their time is coming to an end.
Yeah, I think some might be. One of the things that I've looked into throughout this journey is the what are called end of life experiences, or ELEs. And there are just countless stories, right? So these would be people often like in hospice, where they don't have a lot of time left. And there are countless stories of things that happen to people at the end of their lives that make the process of death less frightening and even welcome. It happened to us just last year. My sister's grandmother-in-law passed away. She was in hospice, and she started seeing her deceased relatives gathering around her bed. And it was fascinating because before this, she had had a stroke and she was completely out of it. You know, she couldn't remember anybody's names, for instance. Then one day she sits up in bed, and as clear as a bell, she starts rattling off the names of these people she says are standing right in the room with us. These are people who died 30 years ago, like her uncle, her mom, and her dad. And she's saying this all with perfect clarity. And then she couldn't wait to go with them. She literally could not wait. She started saying, why didn't they take me right now? She said, they said I have to wait for some reason. Why do I have to wait? So these things can happen. Death is something in this society that we kind of box up and shove away, right? We keep it hidden away in hospitals often, and it's not a part of our lives the way that it is in other cultures and the way that it has been in times past, where death was much more a part of life and talked about openly. We don't do that, and I think that's to our detriment, because the process of dying does not have to be a frightening thing. There's a guy named Dr. Timothy Kerr, I believe his name is. He runs the hospice out of Buffalo, if I'm not mistaken. He's got a great TED Talk called I See Dead People, I think. And I recommend everybody watch that. And that's exactly what this is about. It's his experience in a lifetime of hospice care and what he has learned as a materialist scientist, by the way. He went into this as a skeptic, I think, of any life after death sort of possibility. And what he has experienced has totally changed his perceptions about what death is.
Right. It's that elusive aspect. I love that, it was so easy to discern and say, oh, death is this, and near-death experiences is just the synaptic response of the brain shutting down and being oxygen deprived. And when it reawakens, that's just the shutting down is the light, all of those things. Mm-hmm. And it's so easily dismissive. But then you've got Dr. Eben Alexander, a neurosurgeon, who was an agnostic or perhaps even atheistic at one point. Right. I can't remember that aspect of his story, but had that near-death experience that left him believing we are so much more than the physical carnate version of who we are, that consciousness exists outside of the physical form. So science has to start to understand that, or has to start relating to that at some point. And although science has been dismissive through the years of, we can't replicate that in a science aspect. There's right. enough evidential proof that this happens that we can't keep summarily dismissing it.
Yeah. I mean, that is why I wrote this book because I have now in the last chapter of the book, which I actually hesitated to include because for a lot of people it's going to be way beyond what they think of as possible. But if you read the book, what happens in that last chapter, when it happened, I was sitting beside a New York Times journalist, by the way, and she has written about it herself. Her name's Leslie Kean. And the only reason I mention that is because, a journalist of her caliber, her word is her livelihood. She has to be very careful about what she says and even more careful about what she prints. So you can trust that what she says is the truth. And I just from me to you and your listeners, on my heart, on my soul, I'm telling you the truth about what happened in that last chapter. And because I have now experienced that, and what happened, by the way, was an objective thing, physical thing. It was not a subjective, everyone in the room witnessed it happen. It was a communal experience, So because I had that experience, I now know without doubt that no matter how many Nobel Prizes a scientist might have, if they tell you that there is no such thing as the paranormal, I don't even like that word because I just think I now believe it's all normal. It's all part of whatever this is. Para indicates, seems to say that it's outside of the natural world when I don't believe that it is. But anyway, I now know that any scientist, no matter how many degrees they have, if they tell you there's no such thing as that stuff, they are wrong. It doesn't matter how much smarter than me they are, and they are, right? I'm a guy of average intelligence. There are people way, way smarter than me out there who tell me that there is no such thing as life after death. There is no such thing as the paranormal or any evidence suggesting that consciousness has an effect or an influence outside of the brain. But it doesn't matter how smart they are. They're wrong about that, and I know it.
Let's do this. We're going to take a quick break. Love, Dad, How My Father Died, Then Told Me He Didn't is the name of the book. We have a link up to that in today's program guide, so you can click it, order the book. Remember to rate and review the books as well. Stay tuned. We've got more coming your way with our guest, Mike Anthony, right after this. Welcome back to the program. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. That guy over there is Tim Dennis. Remember, tonight we have the live Holzer Files, Holzer's Ghosts streaming program that'll take place on our Darkness Radio and my Facebook page, live video stream. It'll also be on our YouTube Darkness Radio page, so make sure you go to YouTube, look up Darkness Radio, subscribe, never miss an episode of our special bonus material there. My guests tonight are Shane Pittman and Cindy Kaza from the Holzer Files. Also, Erica Frost, the medium that worked aboard the Queen Mary for a number of years, will be on there. We're going to talk about last week's episode, Dead Calm. We'll take your questions, we'll interact, have a lot of fun. Plus, I've got two really terrifying EVP that did not make the episode that we're going to share tonight exclusively on that show. For those of you that are listeners to the podcast form only, you can listen to that on tomorrow's episode of Darkness Radio. Holzer's Ghosts, Dead Calm, The Haunting of the Queen Mary. That's the episode. So make sure you tune into that. Love, Dad, How My Father Died, Then Told Me He Didn't. Mike Anthony, our guest today. That's the name of his book. We have a link up for that book, as I said, in today's program guide. All right, Mike, you see these telegraphed messages prior to his death, really, that he's left these keys behind. You have this kind of connection, your music speaking to you on this. Are you skeptical? And I know you were prior to this, but I mean, were you skeptical at, I'm wanting this, I need to grieve. This is part of the grieving process. I'm seeing something where there is nothing. How did you break that down working through it for yourself? Because I know that's a question I have and many people have had, wanting to have an experience.
Yeah, I very much struggled with that. And even to this day, it's something that's my brain, my brain just won't let me have it, right? In the moment, I'll have something extraordinary happen. And in the moment, I know that I saw what I saw and I heard what I heard, and I know that it cannot be explained by science. Then an hour later, my brain my rational, skeptical brain starts going, well, what about this? What about that? And that's something called retrocognitive dissonance, right? We know cognitive dissonance is a pretty well-established phenomenon, and it just means basically that if something comes into your reality that somehow threatens your sense of reality or your sense of self, our very carefully constructed senses of what we are and what the reality is that we exist within, if anything comes in that threatens that, the brain is really good at letting it pass by as though it never even heard it. And that's one of the reasons why some of this astounding evidence is out there suggesting, for instance, reincarnation, right? There's incredible evidence out there that reincarnation really is a real thing that happens. Out at the University of Virginia, the Division of Perceptual Studies, it started with Dr. Ian Stevenson, and for over 50 years now, 55 years, they've been accumulating this evidence, and the evidence is so strong that the book editor for the Journal of the American Medical Association, right, which is the one of the most respected scientific journals in the whole world, when the book editor for JAMA looked at Dr. Stevenson's work and one of his books, he concluded that reincarnation is the most likely explanation. That's JAMA that concluded that. And yet most people have never heard of it. Now, what I always tell people is that if JAMA tomorrow came out and told us that saturated fat in eggs is not as bad as we thought it was, eggs are totally okay to have, there would be parties out in the streets. It'd be on the nightly news. Oh my God, eggs are safe. When they concluded that that reincarnation was an actual phenomenon, almost no one heard about it, even within the academic scientific communities. And according to Dr. Tucker, who is now the head of the Division of Perceptual Studies at UVA, cognitive dissonance is one of the reasons that people simply don't take in the data. It's like the brain puts up a wall and they just don't take it in. Now, my brain is definitely guilty of that. I have a hard time, it takes a lot to convince me. And but I think that there's a reason for that. And my hope is, though, that people who read my book, who might be on the skeptical side of the spectrum right now, will appreciate that I was the same way, and they will appreciate the lengths that I went to prove to my own mind that I was experiencing what I thought I was, but again, by the time I get to the end of the book, I have that objective experience that it simply happened. There's nothing, it unequivocally happened. So I'm talking about sort of the rest of the journey, these other signs that I felt like I got from my dad. I ended up doing some research with mediums, mental mediums, and looking at, doing a lot of statistical analysis and things like that. And those were the things that my brain, as amazing as they were in the moment, I had a real hard time. My brain just had a hard time letting me have those things.
Yeah, it's weird how we fight that. It's the answer we all want, right? We want to know that we exist,
right?
Beyond it, but why do you think logically we fight it? Logically, that's what we want. Why dismiss it so much?
I think that there are a lot of reasons for that. For some people, it might be scary, right? If some people, I think, might be happy to vaguely have in the back of their minds, let's say that they're religious, right? And they know that the Bible or the Quran or the Torah or whatever, the Bhagavad Gita tells you that you do this, and this in your life, and you behave in this way, and then you're going to have this paradise afterwards. And that's sort of enough for a lot of people to kind of have that in the back of their mind. I think to really confront it in the way that you guys do, and the way that I have since my dad's passing, it takes a certain amount of bravery to really look death in the face and what it might mean to be more than this body, and what it might mean in a real sort of tangible way to survive the death of this body, because we don't. I know now without question that the consciousness is not confined to the skull, right? At the very least, I know that. And the evidence very strongly points to me in the direction that life goes on after death. But what exactly that means, obviously, I don't know. We have reports from the people who say they've been there, people who have had near-death experiences, for instance, have these fascinating reports. But I think for the public at large, as much as we want to believe in a life after death, it's just a lot, I think, for the human brain to take in, right? I think that while we're confined to a human brain, we can only handle so much information. People who have a near-death experience, for instance, to generalize, because of course they're incredibly individual and varied, but one of the general themes is that people have this expansive experience often, right, where they suddenly feel like they understand everything, right? Like they're given this download of information and everything makes sense, and they feel this incredible peace and love. And then they come, they're resuscitated and they're shocked back into their body. And now their brain, they can't grasp it again because now they're perceiving through their brain again. So my instinct on all of this, so now we're leaving science, obviously, this is just my own instinct, is that the brain acts as some sort of a filter, some sort of a limiting device that really directs our experience and gives us only a very, very directed experience, right? I mean, if we look at just our eyes, the electromagnetic spectrum is this huge, long thing, right? It goes all the way down long radio waves on one end up to gamma rays on the other. Our eyes are set up to see a tiny percentage of that whole spectrum. The visible part of the spectrum is tiny. And if we were bats or alligators or anything else, the whole world would look entirely different to us than it does. So yeah, to answer your question, I think that the reason we have a hard time accepting all of this is because I don't know that the brain is set up to understand it, I think.
I've often wondered if it's a protective measure put in place by the creator, because I've dealt with depression and suicidal thoughts and anxiety throughout my life. Mm-hmm. The one constant is my continual fear of death. If the fear of death is removed, the concept that we can live again, is it a survival technique that our brain doesn't want to naturally absorb it because that's what keeps us alive? I do feel that that's been a big aspect of my journey, is why I'm always questioning and not willing to settle, is because, oh, well, hell, if I know I can reboot and come back and, be Elvis's great-great-grandson in the next life, why not? Sign me up. I'm tired of this nonsense. And that might just be the trigger that helps people that are on that brink of, do I end it here or not? Is that the survival instinct, the continuing to question?
Yeah, that could be part of it. First of all, I want to say that I'm tremendously glad that your dad pulled in the driveway that day and that you're still here with us. I think the work that you're doing is very important. I really mean that. What you're doing is opening up not only minds, but it opens up hearts as well. And I think it's incredibly important work that you're doing. So I'm personally glad that you're still with us, and I hope you're here for many, many, many years to come. I think that, what a lot of people say who have, again, to go to people who've had near-death experiences, there's also another way to access this for some people through hypnosis, right? Some people have past life regressions. And in the most interesting cases to me, there's something called LBL therapy, life between lives therapy. And people who are put into this deep hypnotic state, or people who have NDEs, will often say that what we're experiencing here as a human life, it's intended as some sort of a lesson, right? It's some sort of a curriculum. We're here to learn something, to grow in some way. And the reason that the brain limits our ability to perceive the whole picture is because if we did perceive the whole picture, this schoolroom wouldn't have validity to us, right? The thing that gives weight to our human experience is the very persistent illusion that this is all there is. So that could be a part of it. There's this great story. It was described also in the show Lost, which was one of my favorite televisions of all time. There's this kid, Charlie, who's going through this very difficult drug. He's addicted to drugs, I think. And anyway, there's the John Locke character gives him this lesson one day when they're out in the woods and they see this moth that's trying to get out of this cocoon, and it's struggling to get out of the cocoon. And John says to this younger character, he says, now I could help this moth to get out. I could use my knife and open up the chrysalis and get this moth out of there. But if I do that, its wings are not going to be strong enough to fly. The thing that gives the wings the strength that it needs is the very process of escaping from that cocoon. And maybe that's something of what human life is. Maybe this struggle is growing one of our muscles in some way, for lack of a better way to phrase it, right? Maybe our spirits inhabit this form, this human form, because it's sort of like going to the gym for the soul, right? Maybe we're growing in some way that we can't quite fathom while we're stuck in the body, because again, we're seeing through the human brain. But then when someone passes and is released from this human brain, maybe then we're able to realize why we were put through the things that we went through. And right, there's so much that's awful on this planet, right? There's so much terribleness out there. And that might help to provide maybe a reason for why some of that stuff is there potentially.
Well, in dealing with your loss and the reconnection with your father, did anyone else in your family feel immediate connections to him as well?
They did. Yeah, it happened for all of us. My mom was standing in the bathroom one morning and she heard my dad say her name, and she heard it like he was standing beside her. It wasn't in her head. And I quizzed my mom on this. I wanted to know exactly what it is that happened when she says she, quote unquote, heard his voice. And she says it was from external, it wasn't something she heard in her mind. It was as though he was standing beside her and talking into her left ear. And so we all had these experiences. And another thing that I want to say to people, my experiences are atypical. I now realize I have been incredibly fortunate to have such direct evidence. And also what's happened through mediums. I now know that doesn't often happen this way. I think that this might be a skill, the ability to communicate the way that my dad does from the other side or from wherever it is that he is now. I think it might be a skill like anything else. And like some people on this side can throw a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. Maybe some people have the ability to communicate really clearly the way that my dad does. So if any of your listeners are not getting the signs as clearly as I have gotten them, or if they read the book and they see the amazing experiences we had through mediumship and it doesn't quite happen that way for them, I don't want people to feel disappointed or to in any way think that means that their loved ones are not just as present as my father is. I really just think that my dad happens to be particularly good at this form of communication.
Was it a surprise to your mom, obviously, that they'd been divorced, that he would make contact with her?
No, because they had a very unique relationship, which I describe in the book. They met when they were 12 years old, 11 and 12, and they got married right out of high school. And so they then had me and then got divorced when they were still kids, but they remained best friends, after some turmoil, of course. But they remained friends and close through their whole lives. And my mom, to this day, she feels like they're soulmates. Which is to say that she feels like they have a connection that goes well beyond this current physical life. So she was absolutely crushed. She wouldn't let my dad go. She was, were like, trying to take him away, and she just did not want to let him go. So it's not a surprise that he would do whatever he could to communicate with her as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right. So in these experiences, now, did you ever physically see a manifestation of your father?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. This is part of that last chapter. So there's this stuff called ectoplasm, right? Which I was sure was a word invented by Harold Ramis and Ghostbusters. And ectoplasm was the stuff that Slimer left on the bookshelves at the New York Public Library in the movie. That's what I thought ectoplasm was. As it turns out, it is a real substance that some mediums, right? So these are people who claim the ability to communicate with the dead. We can divide mediumship into two categories: mental mediumship, and that's the one that most of us are familiar with, like from Crossing Over with John Edward or the Long Island medium. And then there's physical mediumship, which is this other form where the medium goes into a very deep trance, supposedly. And once in this trance, the spirit world is able to use their body, their physical mechanism, to communicate directly, and they can extract this substance called ectoplasm and use that to physically materialize in the room, as crazy as that sounds. So in the most advanced forms of this mediumship, you can be sitting in a room and your dead father can form in the middle of the room, as solid as he was when he was alive. And you can see him and touch him and hug him. I mean, that's the most advanced form of this, which very rarely happens now, as far as we know. There are only maybe 7 physical mediums that we know of right now on the planet who do this at a developed enough state so that you can actually witness some of the stuff. And I had the chance to sit with one of them, a guy named Stuart Alexander, and it completely changed my perception of reality, completely changed my perception of what's possible. And again, this is how I know that no matter how many Nobel Prizes are sitting on a scientist's shelf, I know that they're wrong if they tell you this is not possible. And I saw my father's form over this guy's face. Leslie Kane, the journalist from the Times, she saw it as well.
Was it like a projection, as though you could see it shimmering in front of her, or in front of the medium, or was it a full, like he was standing in front of now the medium and was a fully formed 3-dimensional being?
In this case, it was just his face. It looked as though it was floating almost an inch or so in front of the medium's face. And it was it's very hard to describe the fluid nature with which this this ectoplasm uses. But the medium, for instance, only had a very thin beard, and my dad had a fuller beard. I suddenly saw my dad's beard fill in front of this guy's face. It's really hard to describe without sounding nuts. But yeah, it's as though my dad's face formed and was sort of floating in front of the medium's face. And then he talked to me. My dad talked to me through his own face. And then there are other things that happen that I describe in the book where like the physical nature of this, there's no doubt about, because people touch it. And I saw it happen with my own eyes. Like I saw a human hand form. A human hand formed out of nothing. Out of nothing, Dave. I mean, there was this misty kind of fluid, amorphous thing that formed into a human hand that then banged on the table so everyone could hear that it was physical. And I'm sitting 5 inches from it at this point. I'm 5 inches from my eyeballs because I knelt down. It happened on this table, and they let me kneel down so I could be right on top of it, literally. And then I watched Leslie shake the hand, and she could feel the bones. She could feel the warmth, the warm, soft skin. It was a human hand. For all intents and purposes, it was a human hand. Then she let it go, and right in front of my face, I watched that thing dissolve into nothing and disappear in front of my face. And I watched this happen multiple times. I've now seen it in multiple different locations. So it's not like this is a one-off thing. This happens all the time in this guy's seance room every week. This happens almost every week. And many, many, many people have witnessed it now. Many people. The guy's name is Stuart Alexander. He wrote a great book called An Extraordinary Journey, which I highly recommend to everyone. And it'll change your life. And to see it in person completely changed my life.
What is it about Stuart that you believe he's able to do this? Is he simply a conduit? Is he projecting this being, giving it form? How exactly does that work from your understanding?
According to Stuart, it's everyone has to a greater or lesser degree this substance in them. Now ectoplasm, by the way, it's been tested in a lab by a Nobel Prize winner. This, I thought it had been coined. The word had been coined by Harold Ramis. It's actually coined by a guy named Charles Richet, who won the Nobel Prize in physiology. Right. He did not win the Nobel Prize in astronomy. He won a Nobel Prize for his study of the human body. And he sat with physical mediums and came to the conclusion that this stuff was real. And at one point, he was allowed to basically cut off a piece of this stuff. It comes out of the medium via their nose, their ears, their mouth. It looks incredibly strange. When you look at it in photographs, I mean, when I first saw the pictures, I thought, but that's obviously fake. This guy's got cotton out of his mouth. It's absurd. And that's what you'll think when you see these photographs. And that's what I would have thought. And until I had this experience myself, I mean, that's obviously what you would think. Any rational person would think, seeing these photographs. But anyway, so the substance can also come out of their solar plexus area, right through their clothes. And that's how it mostly happens with Stewart. It seems to come through his solar plexus area. And this guy, cut it off, took it back to a lab, investigated it, and it had light lymphocytes in it and white blood cells and things. The spirit world claims that this substance is the only substance that is part spirit, whatever that means, and part physical. It's the only substance that exists in both worlds at the same time, according to them. Again, it's hard to know what exactly that means. We know that it does not last long outside of the presence of the physical medium. So when it was taken to the lab and tested, it eventually disappears and evaporates into nothing. So what Stewart says is that everyone has it in them to a greater or lesser degree. Physical mediums are people who have an abundance of it. But to discover that you have it takes an enormous amount of effort and dedication, because it's not like you just all of a sudden start exuding this stuff out of your body. Stewart, when he was about 30 years old, he's living this totally normal life. He'd never heard of anything like mediumship. He had a very successful business. His brother gave him a book about physical mediumship, and they read it, and his brother was like, let's try this. Let's have a seance and try it. And so they did, and nothing happened. So then for a number of years, they'd get together once a week on Saturday nights, sit in a dark room, wait for something to happen. Nothing would, until eventually it did. And the spirit world says that they need that time, apparently, to work with the medium, to learn how to use their ectoplasm in a way that is visible to the people sitting in the room. And again, I just want to be clear that I'm aware of how nutty this might sound to people. And if I hadn't seen it actually happen with my own eyes, I would have had a very difficult time believing this as well. But that's what Stewart says, that a physical medium is just a person who has this substance in them, who has put in the time. And it can take years before anything happens. A lot of dedication. And then the spirit world sort of takes over. So Stewart doesn't remember anything. He goes into a trance. And that's one thing that we can say for sure does happen, because we've put physical mediums, we've used electroencephalograms on them, EEG machines, to detect their brainwave patterns. And we do know that their brain patterns shift. They go from a beta to an alpha wave. So something is happening. That we can at least say. And Stewart himself has been tested in this way. So we know that his brain shifts from a normal waking state of consciousness brainwave pattern into something else that might resemble sleep or even be deeper than sleep. And
what, I'm sorry, Stewart's last name is?
Alexander, Stewart Alexander.
Okay, I'll try to find some information that I can put on today's episode as well, folks, so that we can have more about that. That's fascinating. When you hear this, it's one thing to think that life exists and ghosts exist. I want to know your thoughts going into this seance, this attempt to connect. And in 100% honesty, what was that like for you? Did you have expectations? I mean, we all have high hopes, but what did you think was really going to happen?
I had read about it because Leslie Kean wrote a book called Surviving Death, which is what the Netflix series is based on. And so she is how I learned about physical mediumship being this a genuine phenomenon, according to her. So I had read about it in her book, but nothing could prepare me for what happened. Going into the actual seance room that night, it was surreal. Just the fact that I happened to be sitting in that room, the way that I found Leslie's book, and then less than a year later, I'm sitting in that room with her. I tell that whole story in the book, but that was crazy just on itself. So my heart was pounding. I started sweating. There was some fear also, about what was going to happen. But then once it started, my rational brain, goes into overdrive. Like, what am I looking at right now? What can this be? And even in that moment, that's sort of why I asked to kneel down, because I'm thinking, well, if these people are faking this somehow, let me try to throw a wrench into their process here. And that's why I asked if I could kneel down by the table, because now I'm sitting right by Stuart, so I have this guy right on my right. I can touch him with my hand. He's sitting less than a foot from me. And then I have Leslie on my left. So I'm right on top of this thing when it happens. So I know exactly what it is that I'm seeing. Yeah, it's very difficult to describe what the moment is like. It's like getting cracked open in a way. My dad's death was a shattering event in one way. This was a shattering event, but in a positive way. It totally opened up my world. Can
I reel you back for 1 second? Then when you go in and you have this, I'm going to watch for this fakery. I'm going to see if there's some kind of chicanery. Do you worry that that's going to put you in the mindset of not being in the moment to experience what the possibility could be? But that's what my fear is. I've wanted to go to one of these trance mediums or physical mediums to have an experience like that, but I'm so afraid the Houdini in me is going to be looking for mirrors and smoke that I'm not going to give myself the full advantage of being in that moment.
Yeah, that was on my mind. And what mediums say also is that a negative attitude will affect the quality of the mediumship. And of course, my skeptical mind, that was a huge red flag. I'm thinking, oh, of course, my skeptical attitude is going to make it so this doesn't work. That was in the back of my mind. But I'll also say that I spent a week with these people before the seance. I got to know Stuart. I went and had dinner with him and his wife, and I was scrutinizing everything about this guy and his house and his wife and his grandkids, watching him with his grandkids, looking for anything, any note of snake oil salesman, and there was simply nothing. This guy struck me as like the most level-headed, down to earth, honorable guy. He's very British in the sense that he's this very gentle, dry sense of humor, just very, very lovely guy. I asked his wife about how they met. I wanted to know everything. And they met when they were kids, like my mom and dad, and I spent a lot of time talking to his wife about what it was like as Stuart discovered this part of his life. And I just really got to know them as human beings. So when I went into the room that night, it was already hard for me to imagine that these people were lying to me. And also the other thing, there is no money exchanged here. By the way, Stuart doesn't make a dime off of his seances. He has done this just out of curiosity. For the 30 years, it was just him, his wife, and a few friends who were getting together once a week to do this. No money has ever been made by him. Now I guess maybe if people buy his book, but that just recently was published. I mean, so there was no financial reason for him to be doing this either. So yeah, it was on my mind, the worry about being my skepticism affecting things. But I'll also say that I'm skeptical but open-minded. I'm not closed off to any possibility.
Right.
And skeptical as discerning as I tried to be about what was happening, it obviously did not affect the thing, because I saw more things that night too. I mean, it was just a stunning display of paranormal activity. It was just a stunning display.
And you are certain, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this was not tomfoolery, no laser projection lights, nothing like that, that you were fully in contact with your father?
Completely no doubt about it.
Amazing.
Absolutely no doubt about it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in contact with my father, that's another level. I don't know that we can ever say with 100% certainty, right, that it is proof of life after death. I don't think there's any way to do that. That's where the evidence points for me. What I can say with 100% certainty is that some people have a substance in them that can come out of their body, form into a human hand, and then disappear in front of your face. So that's what I can say. The evidence suggests very strongly to me that it really is an independent agency that is behind this. But is there the possibility that it's Stewart's brain somehow doing it, that it's a superhuman, for lack of a better word, a superhuman ability that we don't understand yet? That's certainly a possibility.
No less extraordinary and amazing.
No less. That alone totally shatters our current scientific paradigm. That alone shatters the paradigm. And that's what, that's what I'm hoping for, that people just realize, there are many people in my life who are sure that it is evidence of life after death. I'm just trying to get the people at large to see that something at all is happening here, because it definitely truly is.
That's got to be pretty life altering as well. Once you start to embrace this and see these things for yourself, how does that shape and change the way you look at every aspect of life?
Yeah, that's what it does change everything. I mean, it affects how you look out of your eyeballs, right? I mean, the world is this, the universe is this mysterious place, the rules for which we do not understand. No matter how much science thinks that we have the rules pretty much down, we don't. And quantum physics is getting to that point. It's starting to catch up, where quantum physics is a really bizarre place to be right now. And it's confounding, and we don't understand it. And we're starting to see in the lab that the universe is a very tricky place that we don't understand the foundations of how it works. So yeah, having this experience or an experience like it really opens up your whole life, and for me, I actually feel lighter. Like it's added a levity to my life to know that this stuff is out there. And I actually feel like I'm in two movies, right? Like I'll be at the store, I'm like getting my carrots, and meanwhile, as I'm going to reach for those carrots, I know that in a room in England, spirits fully materialize and walk around the room and talk to you, right? And then there's a lady passing me picking up her potatoes, and she doesn't know that that's possible. It's like we're in these two different movies. So it's kind of a bizarre. It's like I know this wonderful secret that the majority of at least Western society doesn't know. So it's been a fascinating ride.
I'm jealous. I have something I want to look into. I know earlier, about 2 years ago, I was offered an opportunity to go to Las Vegas to meet with a medium, and I cannot for the life of me remember the name, who supposedly manifests things, but it had to be done in a dark room only.
Yes. Yeah, that's a big part of it. And that was obviously a huge red flag, as it should be. But according to physical mediums and some scientists who have looked into this, like this guy Charles Roche, this stuff is very sensitive to light. Ectoplasm. It's very sensitive to light, and it cannot exist for very long in the presence of light. Now, Stewart works in light, so you see this happen. They use red light because that's the lowest energy visible wavelength that our eyes can see is red, but you can fully see it. It happens in the light. But this guy, you might be talking about David Thompson, possibly.
That might be it. That sounds familiar.
Okay, yeah, I've sat with him too, yeah,
is he the one that has like two guides? One's this big giant fella,
yes,
and one's a kid.
Yes,
and the kid will appear, and you can see his little hand appear in front of you, and he's holding like a ball that's lit up or something.
Yes, he's holding like a light, a ping pong ball that glows in the dark. Yeah, right. I've seen that guy, and he's fascinating, but it's hard. He's harder for me to because it is in pitch black darkness. That's one that my brain really has. I've sat with him 5 times now, and I've seen some stunning things because some of it, they do use luminous tape on some objects. And there was an object in that room, and the way that it moved around the room was impossible to understand. The speed. We were in a large room, and the speed that this thing moved, and it would sometimes fly right up to your face and then stop right in front of your face and then zoom off to the other side of the room. I mean, if you have a chance to sit with him again, I do recommend it because even though it's mostly in pitch black, some things happen that you can't see, and it very difficult to explain.
That's amazing. Now, did you feel that he was the real deal? I know that wasn't the same part of the story, but did you feel that there was something truly paranormal about that? Because I guess the big fella, I can't remember the name of the guy that he works with,
William,
physically put his hands on you, and you could feel these giant hands touch you, and you could see the child's hand, and you could see some stuff, but it just sounds so far out there that I took myself out of it. I just couldn't commit to it at that time.
Yeah, for me, he has some questions surrounding him. He's got some questions that come out of his past, from his, even from old friends of his. I'm not sure what to make of him. I've had that guy. William is the name of the guide. And, if you ask a question, William will then come over and ask if you'd like to have him put his hand on your head. And a lot of people did that, and they were all describing this huge hand right on their head. And then when he put his hand on mine, I thought, I don't know if that's as big as people think it is, right? So when we came out, and I was with Leslie, the same journalist from the Times, and she said, it felt to me like his hand was really huge. And I said, okay, well, close your eyes. Let me put my hand on your head and see how it feels. And when she did that, my hand felt about the same to her as what we were. So, the mind is a powerful thing. So I don't know what to make of that guy. Complicating things even further within this whole world of physical mediumship is that we know there have been, as you mentioned Houdini, there have been a ton of people who have been caught faking this stuff. That's for sure. That has happened. And then even more strange is there are what are known as mixed mediums. So people who do seem to have an ability, and yet sometimes they cheat, even though they have an ability at other times. And the reasons for that are varied and many. So it's a complicated world, and that's why I kind of, in the book, I stick only to Stewart, because with Stewart, there is no question about his sincerity. There is no question about his honesty. There's never been a question raised about his honesty, and it happens in light. So everyone in the room is seeing what you're seeing.
Oh, that's phenomenal. And Stewart's based out of England?
Yeah, a little town in England. He's an older gentleman now. He's in his 70s. Every now and again, he'll do a larger. Usually, we just sit at our friend Carol's house, Mm-hmm. But once a year, he does. He sometimes does a larger sitting. So. I'll let you know next time one of those is coming up. If we haven't been sitting, because I sit with Stewart now once a week remotely. Leslie and I are sitting in New York, and they are in England, and we kind of just over FaceTime sit with them every week. It's been shut down for COVID, obviously, for the past year, but once it picks up again, I'll let you know. I'd love for you to be a guest with me to experience this if he does another public one.
Please contact me, Mike. I'd certainly be fascinated to have that experience and hear more. And we'll even reach out to Stuart. Maybe you can help that so that we can interview him on the show and just have an open dialogue with him before that would ever take place. But you've made such a transcendent discovery for yourself that you're sharing with others now through this book. What do you say to the naysayers, to the skeptics, to the cynics out there that it's part of your grieving? It's part of your want and desire to make that contact. That's the only thing that's really taking place. You're being fooled through hypnosis or through your own grieving process. What do you say to people like that?
Yeah, I write about skeptics a bit in my book, and again, I think there is a difference between being a skeptic and being a debunker. I think we should all be skeptical, right? Meaning just simply meaning that we maintain our critically thinking mind. You've got to always do that, and then you have debunkers who have decided before they even investigate a thing. Often they don't even investigate it; they've just decided that it's impossible, and so it can't be real. I literally had a scientist say to me, "It can't be because it can't be," which makes no sense at all. So I don't say much to people who are totally walled off from this stuff. The reason that I wrote the book, because I am so secure in what happened for myself that it doesn't matter to me anymore what a hardened debunker or skeptic says. It has no effect on me whatsoever. I know what I know. I know what I have experienced. But I would love to talk with people who are skeptics, who are willing to listen to information that is out there, because it can make your life better, right? It can open up your world, and if you end up coming out of this with a belief that life does go on after death, that your dad, your mom, your kids, whoever, goodness forbid, that you've lost in your life, to come out of this journey knowing, or at least really having a solid sense that they are still there, that you've not lost them forever, it can lighten up your entire life. Where death is such a presence in all of our lives, right? It's always kind of there in the background, and it's something we all worry about. And you've talked yourself about how afraid of death you are, and many of us are. If you've had the experiences that I've had, and you open yourself up to this stuff, and you're not so worried about the end of the journey anymore, then the journey itself becomes the thing, right? Then you can just enjoy the ride if you're not worried about the end of the ride. And that's where I am in my life now. So, to people who are debunkers, I'm not going to waste a whole lot of energy trying to convince them, because I'm sharing this information in the hopes that it might bring comfort to some people who need it, people who are open to it. And the information is out there for those who seek it. That's what I found. I was shocked that that there's information at the University of Virginia, the University of Arizona, the Windbridge Research Center. I mean, the information is out there for those who seek it. And that's my only goal, is to put more of it out there, make it more accessible, so that if someone is grieving or feeling fear about death or whatever, that this might open up a door for them.
I'm blown away by your story, and just especially the overwhelming amount of information and evidence that you've gotten to communicate. What do you think then the lesson of life should be to people? I know that's a big kind of innocuous question, but if we can get over this fear of death or fear of the end, do you worry, like I mentioned at the beginning, is that something that then gives people free will a little bit more open to do more damage to themselves because they know there's a reset button?
Yeah, I've had someone else ask me about this. There was a movie with I forget the actor's name, big famous actor, and in it he plays a scientist who discovers without question that life goes on after death, and then there are these spate of suicides, right? Once people know for sure that there's something else, and obviously that's not something that I advocate at all. My personal sense of all of this is that there is a reason we're doing this. There's a reason that we're here, and that if we exit early, from what I understand, we end up often turning around and coming right back. And not because we're forced to, because we want to. This from what I've gathered, and again, so now we're going away from science, and this is more of just personal belief based on other people's personal experiences. It seems to me that we choose to do this. We choose to come here to do this thing, this living, and getting, taking an early exit is not beneficial. It's not beneficial to us in the larger sense. And I say that realizing that, someone who ends up dying by suicide, and I don't call it committing suicide, because it's a diseases of the mind are as real as anything else. And if you're feeling low enough that you feel like you can't handle this anymore, that happened to you. It's something that happens to you. It happened to your brain. So anyone who's feeling that low, my heart goes out to them. And I know that everything that I'm saying is much easier said than done, and I struggle with anxiety myself. I have obsessive compulsive disorder. So I understand what's anxieties can be like. I've not struggled with this sort of depression that we've talked about, but that is my sense, that we're here to experience whatever this is that we're experiencing. And the bottom line is that I feel like one of the main lessons that people seem to come back with, to again go back to near-death experiences, is that the most important thing we can do is be kind to each other. To be here for each other, to love each other. And maybe if there was more of that, there'd probably be less depression and sadness in the world. I mean, a part of me thinks that people who get depressed, those are the people who are rational, right? If you look at the news, the only rational response is depression, because the news gives us a skewed view. It focuses on the negative things that happen on the planet. So there's an argument to be made that depression is the rational response to the human condition. And I totally get that. I'm something of, I'm a pretty empathetic person and have been since I was a kid. So I understand that. But yeah, if we're talking again about the meaning of life, whatever this is, I don't know. I sense that loving each other, being here for each other, being kind, being as kind as you can, has something to do with it.
I like it. We talk about that on the show all the time, and most often wrap up the show saying, we'll see you again tomorrow. Be kind, love one another. That's, I know it sounds so basic, but that is the concept, right? Once you can get past the want and desire to always feel hurt and shamed and upset, and just start to accept one another and love one another, see beyond our color, our belief systems, our politics, and just realize we're all in this mess together, and it would go so much better if we just got along. That would be great. And look, there is something that comes next that should make us feel better, and then make us strive to be better, so that, and maybe that's part of why people refuse to do it, is then I might be accountable for what I'm doing in this life, that I don't just get to skirt and be an asshole and then die and it's over and my candle's out, but that I might have to face, not necessarily hell, but I might have to face what I've done. And I've heard interesting aspects from Spirit that have said that what will happen to Mike when he passes is he will briefly live the life of everyone he has ever come into contact with.
Yes.
And feel the hurt, feel the things that have, that's the karma. You get to live that life and feel that kick. And that might make you think better. If it's kind of like they said, if everything you did and every way you treated people was written across your face, would you be as quick to do it?
Right. That's a great,
And that's an interesting facet to all of this, that maybe we just need to be a little bit more in the now and kind, in spite of the pressures and stresses we're all in, and realize, and we see that all the time. Tim and I will get hate mail, somebody will just shred us, and I'll write back and say, hey man, it sounds like you're having a bad day. I'm sorry you feel this way. We wish you all the best and pray for, you to feel better. And I get these emails back that are like, wow, that is not what I expected. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't. And you can see sometimes they just needed to vent, and we could, it would be just as easy to strike back. Yeah. We all vindicated it. I'm not going to let people talk to me. Well, right. But that gets us nowhere. And sometimes by being kind in the face of injustice is when we'll see true change start to take place.
Yeah, I agree. It can be very disarming, kindness, because people aren't primed to expect it. And when you react to anger with kindness, it can really be confusing and disarming, and can de-escalate a situation and really change change the person that you're dealing with. I mean, I've heard so many stories, like you just said, about people who come back from a near-death experience and they're like, dude, if I can give you one piece of advice, it's just be as nice as you can be, because I had to go through how I made everybody feel in my life, everyone that I've ever hurt in any way. So my one piece of advice, just be as nice as you can be.
That's great information. Love, Dad. How My Father Died Then Told Me He Didn't is out and available. Link is in today's program guide. We have a link to Mike Anthony's website as well. Mike, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us and opening the eyes of our audience. And I think I'd love to keep in touch with you and keep this dialogue going and learn more as we go along. And please consider me for any of those public connections again, because I'd love to be a witness to that myself.
Yeah, will do. Thank you guys so much for having me. And again, thanks for what you're doing. I really feel like it's really, truly important stuff. So thanks.
Excellent. All right, check it out, folks. The Kindle version and paperback version are out. Order it through our website, through the link on today's program guide. You'll see that. And remember, all of the great books you hear us mention on the show, go to darknessradio.com, click on the store tab, and you'll see there's two things. The top part of the page is our Amazon storefront. You can click the link. It'll take you to Amazon, where we put all of the books that we mention on the show. Also on my Darkness Radio page on the storefront, if you scroll a little bit down, you'll see the copy of my book that you can order and get as well. So it's all there. Mike, take care of yourself. Be safe and be kind to yourself too, buddy. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Dave and Tim. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Remember, everybody, tune in tonight to our live YouTube channel or our Facebook or Dave Schrader's Facebook page for our live stream of Holzer's Ghosts. And we'll be looking at last week's episode into a pardon the pun, deep dive into Dead Calm, the Queen Mary episode that we shot. And we'll talk about some insights. I've got some creepy EVP that did not make the episode that we will play for you, and more insights from Erica Frost, Cindy Keza, Shane Pittman, and myself, Dave Schrader. And that will be available tomorrow in audio podcast form as well. Stay safe, be kind, love one another. We'll be back with you tomorrow with more of the best in paranormal talk radio. For Tim Dennis, I'm Dave Schrader. This is Darkness Radio.